The French election, already one of the most fascinating and unpredictable polls that Europe has hopes of making the second round. But as we The French election, already one of the most fascinating and unpredictable polls that Europe has witnessed in a generation, has become even tighter. There are now 4 candidates from the hard left to the far right with realistic hopes of making the second round. But as we enter the final stretch, with polls opening in just 2 weeks, what issues can we expect to shape voters' minds as they make their choice? And who, after all that, is likely to come out on top? This is a Foreign Desk.
What we're seeing in France right now is the phenomenon that we have witnessed in the United States with the Trump campaign and in the Brexit campaign, which is the emergence of the insurgents. The insurgents are defying the traditional parties, and the traditional parties are retreating.
The idea was to get in a president who would revive the economy and with realistic policies. But what has actually happened is that we've had such a sleazy campaign. It's turned from being an election that offered some kind of inspiring change to one that has exposed the massive fault lines in French society, and especially among the political class.
If Marine Le Pen is facing Mélenchon in the second round, which is an apocalyptic second round for France, we'll see what happens. If she's facing Macron or she's facing Fillon, she will lose.
The country has been stagnating for too long under a variety of ineffective presidents. And because of the class they come from, they have no reason to change anything.
Hello and welcome to the Foreign Desk. I'm Steve Bloomfield. This is the second part of our French election special. My guests today are Nabila Ramdani and Olivier Royant. Nabila Ramdani is a French journalist and commentator. She joins me here in the studio. Olivier Royant is the editor of Paris Match, and he joins us from France's capital. Nabila and Olivier, thank you both very much for joining us today. Olivier Royant, perhaps if I can begin with you. If you had to sum up this election in a couple of paragraphs, how would you?
Oh, I would characterize it as a big surprise. I mean, this election is on the verge of being totally unpredictable. I mean, the last poll that we published are putting the 4 leading candidates almost within a margin of error, which is absolutely unprecedented. What we're seeing in France right now is the phenomenon that we have witnessed in the United States with the Trump campaign and in the Brexit campaign, which is the emergence of the insurgents. The insurgents are defying the traditional parties, and the traditional parties are retreating, because right now the 2 candidates, François Fillon and Benoît Hamon, being the nominees from the main parties, could be eliminated from the race. So that's a kind of election that we're having right now.
And Nabila Ramdani, why is this happening in France? What are the main reasons as you see it?
Well, I think that this may sound a bit trite, but the election should actually have been about the future of France. And it should always have been about the future of France. And it was meant to be a pivotal election about the social and economic changes and indeed the structural reforms that are needed in France, and which have actually been left festering during most of the post-war period, I would contend. And the idea was to get in a president who would revive the economy and with realistic policies make society a more generous, equal place for everyone and not just for the privileged few. But what has actually happened is that we've had such a sleazy campaign with so many disasters that people have seen what a weak political establishment this is. And you just have to look at the way candidates have essentially self-destructed, and especially the 2 establishment parties, as Olivier was saying, the conservative Republicans and indeed the socialists. And all this has happened during the election campaign. And remember too that the hard right extremist party of Marine Le Pen, generally associated with racism, xenophobia and religious hatred, is actually predicted to go through to the first round of voting. So it's turned from being an election that offered some kind of inspiring change to one that has exposed the massive fault lines in French society, and especially among the political class.
I would add that the main parties that Nabila was mentioning, they didn't manage to reform themselves. And what we are seeing right now is that the electors are going to impose the reform on these parties by blowing basically the establishment. On the other hand, what we could see also is in France, we could see this election as the opposition between the insiders, which the insiders are the people living in Paris, this elite, and the outsiders, these people coming from the small cities, coming from the periphery of France, people who are fragile, the young people. These young people who are absolutely unable in France to enter the working market. I mean, this is the job market. We are seeing people who are 27, 28, 29, who basically cannot get a job in France with 6 million unemployed people. So the Socialist Party and the Conservative from the UMP and the Republican, they totally failed to understand the impact of 6 million people unemployed in France. I mean, how can you have a regular, normal election with this number that keeps on growing?
On that point, though, Nabila, some would argue, well, this number's been that high for some time. What is it about the moment right now that has thrown everything into flux?
Well, you're quite right, Steve, that actually the country has been stagnating for too long under a variety of ineffective presidents who, for a number of different reasons, have shown no ability to reform anything, and they have been scared off by industrial actions predominantly. And because of the class they actually come from, which is a self-serving political establishment, they have no reason to change anything because they do well under the current system. The crisis, the political crisis, however, has been exposed within the Conservative Party by the fact that the party of de Gaulle and traditional France is now led by an indicted criminal suspect. Not only that, but so is his wife, the woman who wants to be First Lady of France. And the crisis within the Socialist Party, traditionally the big opposition party to the Conservatives, is that it has fragmented into three different parties: the liberal left, the Social Democrats, and the Trotskyites left. And in that sense, it is extremely damaging to both the psyche and reputation of a country that is meant to be built on values such as equality and liberty. And it also makes it, the most compelling election campaign for years. Recent presidential elections have been utterly predictable and there has been little variety, but now there's something for everyone.
Well, that's the thing, Olivier, isn't it? Is that it's all very well us saying, oh, well, look, the traditional parties are struggling and there's this huge crisis in France. But actually, in terms of the choice here at this election, this is arguably the most democratic election we've seen in a Western nation for a generation, because you have a choice between Jean-Luc Mélenchon or Emmanuel Macron or François Fillon or Marine Le Pen, or indeed Benoît Hamon as well. And you can't say, oh, all the politicians are the same, they're all offering the same solutions. They're all offering very different solutions, aren't they?
Oh, yes. And Steve, we're having a very fun house there. I mean, sometimes we have a feeling that this campaign is being taken in the 19th century. With Poutou, for example, the candidate from the extreme left, wanted to abolish totally any kind of capitalism. He's speaking like a candidate in the early of the 20th century. I mean, this is fun. I mean, we like that in France. We like this democratic debate, but we are totally forgetting the real situation of France. There is one name that we haven't mentioned so far, which is the name of François Hollande. I mean, the fact that the president refused to be part of the election is a major event in the history in France. It's never happened before. And this, at some point, it was a shock. I mean, you have to understand that for the first time in 2017, we are having on the main parties candidates who are the result of primaries. I mean, for the first time, both candidates are coming from primaries. And the party, the Socialist Party, and the primary and the Republican on the conservative side, we are not ready for this system of primaries. And basically, this system of primaries was so divisive within each camp that the result, as Nabila said, was the production of very weak candidates. Fillon, since the beginning, is a very weak candidate. Maybe like Hillary was a weak candidate. And on the other side, Hamon is also a very weak candidate because he incarnates a very small portion of the traditional socialist electorate.
Nabila, let's look then at François Hollande, who, as Olivier says, chose not to stand because he knew that he had no chance whatsoever. This is a man who came in 2012. He called himself Mr. Normal. He was going to end austerity, which had become increasingly unpopular in France. What went wrong?
Well, one must remember that he also came in by default. He came in reaction to very strong anti-Sarkozy sentiment in France. And that's how he essentially got into the Élysée Palace. He never was convincing, or indeed was a conviction politician. He was primarily seen as a technocrat, somebody who could, come in and pick up from the divisive legacy of Nicolas Sarkozy. But his own legacy has been very poor indeed. He came in as a radical socialist. Remember, he wanted to tax the rich out of France, for example. And his presidency has been marked by such hard left policies. And the very fact that the official socialist candidate, Benoît Hamon, is now more radical than François Hollande makes him a very poor election property.
Sure, but sorry, Hollande may well have campaigned as a proper socialist, as some would see it, but actually once in office, he didn't abandon austerity in the way that he'd said. He talked about this 75% tax rate, but then backed away from it. He hasn't necessarily been a left-wing president, has he, Nabila?
I think he realised when he came into office that he had to be a bit more pragmatic. But his introduction of money men into his government, such as Emmanuel Macron, who was economy minister and who introduced monetary reforms, came far too late.
Olivier, let's also look a little bit further back at Nicolas Sarkozy, because as Nabila says, Hollande's election was partly a reaction to Sarkozy. He tried to revive his career this time around, but came a very disappointing third for him in the primary campaign for the Conservative Party. Do you see what's happening now as a reaction to the last 10 years, the last two presidents?
I think what we are witnessing right now is we went from a system that was based on the presidential republic with a 7-year mandate for the candidate. Basically, the president who was elected has time to implement some kind of program. We switched to the 5-year mandate, and now we are seeing this system destroying the president. I think we have to remember how fast Sarkozy's presidency was burned. In a matter of 2 years, Sarkozy was totally like a sitting duck. Hollande was destroyed at the same speed. What we are seeing on these both men, the fight between Hollande and Sarkozy was a very personal fight. When Sarkozy lost, basically he was telling everybody around him, okay, I will be back in 5 years. I'm going to destroy him this time. I can't believe that I was beaten by Hollande. He never accepted his defeat. So he remained in the system within the right. And it's always complicated to have a former president within your ranks, because basically Sarkozy he got the party, and then he was trying to be a candidate. But it was the wrong choice, because as Nabila said, Sarkozy was rejected by the electorate long time ago. And then Hollande was building all his action on being in front of Sarkozy 4 years later. So he said deep inside, Hollande was believing, I will beat him again. And suddenly when Sarkozy was out of the game, Hollande became also out of the game. And I think this personal fight between these two men, these two president or former president, introduced a very divisive and a very disrupting element within this campaign. And now Sarkozy is saying, okay, Sarkozy is not supporting Fillon. He basically posted a little kind of message on his Facebook page, but he's not appearing on stage with Fillon. Basically, Sarkozy is waiting for the next president to destroy himself and to be back in the race in 2 years from now. And that's also a very disruptive element.
Okay, we'll pause just there. Olivier Royant and Nabila Ramdani, thank you both very much. When we return with our guests, we'll talk Macron, Le Pen and Mélenchon. You're listening to The Foreign Desk here on Monocle 24. In 1995, French President Jacques Chirac apologised on behalf of the nation for the deportation of tens of thousands of French Jews to Nazi death camps during the Second World War. For decades, French politicians had equivocated, arguing that as the country was under German occupation at the time, France should not be held responsible. As Renaud Tillet now explains, the apology was widely welcomed, but 2 decades on, the issue is once again under the spotlight.
Before Chirac's speech in 1995, actually not much was said officially by French presidents. There was some discretion about the topic, because I think the overall feeling was a feeling of discomfort, and there was a sort of official thesis, official line, which was that what had happened was not the responsibility of the French, of France. but was purely the responsibility of Germany, which was occupying France. So that was the line, and there was no need to elaborate on it.
Ces heures noires souillent à jamais notre histoire et sont une injure à notre passé et à nos traditions.
So I think when Jacques Chirac spoke out and held this speech, I think there was an overall recognition that time had come to make that speech. The last few years of the Mitterrand presidency were characterized by the publication of new history books. Some revelations about Mitterrand himself, that he had, at the beginning of the war, collaborated with Vichy, which shocked a lot of people. So I think there was recognition in the general public that, okay, now the time has come to recognize that not all French people were resistance, not all French people followed de Gaulle to London, but that the views were much more mixed. I mean, the reality was much more mixed. So Chirac said in very simple terms what happened on that day of July 1942 was a crime committed by France, by the French, and that it had been a huge mistake, and that it was not down to the occupier, it was the French police.
Oui, la folie criminelle de l'occupant a été, chacun le sait, secondée par des Français, secondée par l'État français.
Obviously, Jewish people were very satisfied about this because they had awaited this speech for a long time. And I think that the speech went down quite well overall, again because the French people were ready to hear that. Of course, there were a few critical reactions, as expected, by Jean-Marie Le Pen, so Marine Le Pen's father, by patriots in general, I would say, so people who attacked the speech as being too critical against France, but this was not the majority. Jean-Marie Le Pen was famous for being controversial. Every couple of months or years there would be a new controversy about something he said, and clearly he made a few comments about that period of time. And Marine Le Pen, I think, since her profile has risen and since she has started frontline politics, she has been very cautious about distancing herself from her father, so sounding more responsible, more respectful. And that's why the comments she made a few days ago came across as a big surprise.
Je pense que la France n'est pas responsable du Veldiv. Voilà.
The overall reaction is, look, Marine Le Pen has been telling us a very nice story for years that the Front National has changed, that her party, or she is not like her father, she's much more responsible. And here she comes, singing the same tunes as her father. So I think the general line in the media, in the French press in the last few days has been, it's still a party which has a problem with French history, a party which struggles to reconcile itself with the bad things France has done in the past.
That was Renaud Tillet. You're listening to The Foreign Desk here on Monocle 24. You're listening to The Foreign Desk here on Monocle 24 with me, Steve Bloomfield. Still with me here in the studio, Nabila Ramdani, and in Paris, Olivier Royant. Olivier, let's start by looking at Marine Le Pen, who for a very long time has been considered a favourite to reach the second round. Are you surprised that she has held on to one of those top two spots for so long?
No, because basically the history of the Popular Front in France is a constant progression over the last 30 years. You have to remember that in 1974, Jean-Marie Le Pen got 0.5% at the presidential election. 30 years, almost 40 years later, his daughter is crediting with 24-25% in the polls. Marine Le Pen was great at rebranding her party, at making it accessible to the people who were the disfranchised from the party, the people who were the forgotten, the leftover of the system, and she was good at that. Now, you have to understand that this is probably the last round for her, because behind her, you have her niece, and her niece will be more capable of going to the extra, to go into the next, probably to the next step. At some point, Marine Le Pen right now is pretty much stuck on her base. You have to wait for the second round. I mean, if Marine Le Pen is facing Mélenchon in the second round, which is an apocalyptic second round for the France, we'll see what happens. If she's facing Macron or she's facing Fillon, she will lose.
At the most basic level, let's look at what the National Front is all about and what Marine Le Pen is all about. She's a small-town politician who has never been able to win a parliamentary seat in her own country, despite trying since 1993. There is only 2 FN MPs in the National Assembly, and she's not one of them. The idea that she can translate these types of facts into becoming President of France is frankly preposterous.
Yes, but sorry, that means she can't get broad support, and that's why everyone thinks it's very unlikely that she could win a second round. But the fact that she is polling at around 25%, and even in a second round might get as much as 35-40%, suggests that she has appealed to a far broader base than her father did before her.
No, I disagree. The National Front has always had a strong body of French people who always vote Front National, and simply because the party has always enjoyed a solid vote between 15 and 25% of the electorate, and now they feel even more emboldened by the Trump and Brexit factors. The reality, though, is that she has no chance of getting the 50% that she needs to become president. And let me add something that is absolutely crucial. The National Front retains terrifying links with racists and indeed especially anti-Semites.
Olivier, do you think that those sorts of comments, that on the whole her party's been careful to try to avoid, even if they may well think it over the recent years, will have an impact when it comes to the vote? When you look at what happened in 2002 when Jean-Marie Le Pen got through to the second round, but then only won 18% in the second round, we're in a very different situation now, aren't we? You know, his daughter is not going to get just 18% in the second round now.
Oh no, and I could disagree with Nabila on this point. I mean, she enlarged her base, especially in some areas in the north of France, in the workers' areas. I mean, she has been taking votes from the workers who were traditionally voting for the Communist Party, for example. What we have to tell our audience is the fact that what has protected the French system from the National Front is the electoral system, which is a 2-round system. And basically, with this 18 to 20% of the vote within the population, the National Front has only 2 seats at the National Assembly. And Marine Le Pen was good at telling that this system was not fair. This Fifth Republic electoral system was the ultimate protection against the extremists. So the fight of Marine Le Pen is also to reform the electoral system to make sure that the National Front could have access to the National Assembly. And it's very important because you have to keep in mind that 40 days after the presidential election, you're going to have a legislative election, the parliament election, and then we're going to see what happens, because basically right on the paper right now, you can't see any candidate that would be able to secure a majority within this parliament.
I want to turn now to Emmanuel Macron, the other front-runner. And Nabila, you were saying before about how the Socialist Party is essentially split in 3. And you have, if you're on the left or the centre-left, you have 3 options here. You've got Jean-Luc Mélenchon further to the left. You've got Benoît Hamon, your official socialist candidate. And then you have Emmanuel Macron, who says he's a centrist, neither left nor right, yet was the economy minister under François Hollande. What do you think explains the rise of Emmanuel Macron?
Well, I think at the moment, Emmanuel Macron is the luckiest man in France. He's not even 40 and was expected to do well, coming 3rd or 4th, and perhaps getting some experience for an election in 5 or 10 years. But in fact, Fillon's destruction and the endemic weakness within the traditional left, and especially the Socialist Party, has opened up the entire election up to him. And his most brilliant move, with hindsight, was to resign from François Hollande's government as economy minister and distance himself from the Socialist Party. And that took a lot of guts and seemingly gave him no base at all. But now he has created one of his own in his En Marche movement.
Olivier, is it fair to describe Macron as an outsider?
No, he's the ultimate insider. He's the ultimate insider because he incarnates the big cities, the elite. He is the banker. He has money. He's coming from the school that seems to be the problem in France, with this ENA, this fabric of public servants who are dominating the whole establishment for the last 60 years. On the other hand, I would say, of course, he's the luckiest man in France right now. And he could be, like Hollande, an accidental president. And Nabila is absolutely right to point out the fragility and the weakness of Fillon. Macron had a vision. He told us a year ago, Hollande won't be candidate. And very few people at that time could really believe that Hollande wouldn't dare to run. And Macron was very bright in knowing that there is a room in the center. He found this room, he identified room in the center, and he invaded this space that was totally left vacant in the middle of France. And this election is about history, the history of France, the long history of France. You have, as Nabila was pointing out before, the revolution themes, the rich against the poor, the religion aspect, and everything was mixed in a big maelstrom within this campaign. The dream of the French would be to be governed in the middle, in the center, with people from the left and people from the right. An ultimate fantasy for the French people because they always are divided between left and right. At this point, Macron has a very strange position because he's standing in the middle. Every time he said, I will do something for this, he said, but I will also do something on the right and I will do something on the left. Will he be able to retain this very unstable position until election day? At this level, he has a chance to become the second accidental president. You have people voting for Macron. They don't know exactly why they are voting for Macron. But first of all, they are voting for Macron because he's young and he's out of the system because this is a very old system that has not been reformed so far.
We've almost reached the end. I'm going to ask you both to do something which I know you're not going to want to do, which is predict what's going to happen. Nabila, since you're sat right next to me, you get to go first. What do you think is likely to happen in the first round and then in the second round?
As Olivier pointed out straight away, incredibly, it looks like both the Socialists and the current Conservative Party could well be rejected in the first round. So that's a first, incredible development. But realistically, I think it's going to be a toss-up between Macron and Le Pen in the first round. They both attract voters who are sick of the system and people who are disappointed by Fillon on the right. I personally predict a very big vote for Macron in the first round, perhaps 28%, and all other candidates around 18-19%. In the second round, I think France is a moderate country that likes clean-cut politicians, and I think it's a one-person election and it revolves around Macron.
Olivier, is there anything you disagree with there?
No, not really. The question that we're asking right now, where has the right in France disappeared? A year ago, the rightist party were on the verge of winning this election, and now where did all these electors go? People want a leader. Right now, they didn't find a leader within Fillon, but at the last moment, maybe they will try to vote for somebody. Even if they don't like him, they will go after Fillon and make him win barely. On the other hand, the rank of the right people, they will say, okay, if we want to secure the election, we have to vote Macron. And we could see, as Nabila was saying, on the last stage of the election, people moving to Macron to make sure that France is being spared from Mélenchon and from Le Pen. So actually, Macron is the luckiest guy on France right now because he could be the one who get the useful vote, as we said, the one who save us from the extremists.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Olivier Royant in Paris, Nabila Ramdani here in the studio. Thank you both very much for joining us on the Foreign Desk. And that's all we have time for on today's edition of the Foreign Desk. Next week, something completely different. However, we will be returning to the topic of the French presidential elections after the second round and we know the winner. I'll be hosting a live edition of the Foreign Desk here at Midori House in London. We'll have some great guests lined up to talk to you about what the election of Marine Le Pen or Emmanuel Macron or, who knows, Jean-Luc Mélenchon means for France and the rest of the world. If you want to be in the audience, I do urge you to come. You can go to monocle.com to buy your tickets now. The Foreign Desk is produced by Carlotta Rebello and Bill Luty, researched by Tom Furs and edited by Dia Caesar. My name is Steve Bloomfield. That was the Foreign Desk. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.